This is a game called Crazy Climber. It came out in 1980. And this is Space Panic, released the same year. Here's a third game from 1981. You already know the name. And this one had jumping. This is the first episode of Mechanically Speaking, and this is an entire video about jumping in 2D. So what makes jumping feel so good? The answer is twofold: responsiveness and fairness to the player. In 1985, Super Mario Bros. Resurrected console gaming from the brink of nothing. It was a high watermark for the industry. So what made it better than what came before? Take a look at Donkey Kong, 1983's Mario Bros. And 1986's Castlevania. There are only two kinds of jumps: straight up and down for when the character is standing still, and a more traditional arc for when the character is moving. Nothing else ever changes. The velocity, trajectory, and the amount of time spent in the air are always the same. The player can't alter the jump in any way. The only input variable we can control is when we decide to press the button. Super Mario invented a lot of neat game design tricks. One of its cleverest hacks is how it lets the player control the length of the jump. Anytime the player presses the jump button, a timer starts. That timer lasts 29 frames. As long as that button is pressed and that timer hasn't run out, Mario ascends. The closer the player gets to that 29 frame limit, Mario slows, and when the timer runs out, he starts descending. It feels like it's pressure sensitive, even though it isn't. And tying jump power to pressure sensitivity comes as second nature, and doesn't even need explaining to the player. The second reason why it was a genius move was that it vastly opened up the game's design space. Before, there was only one kind of jump, which meant there could only be so many kinds of things to jump over. Giving players more control over Mario meant the designers could challenge them with a wider array of obstacles. A wider array of obstacles meant a more compelling experience, filled with a sense of discovery that hadn't been possible until then. Take a look at this room in Metroid. You need to control Samus's jump height and direction mid-air to clear it. It requires active problem solving on the part of the player to progress. Just 5 years earlier, an area with this much variety and interesting challenge would have been impossible to create. But there's more. The length of the timer varies based on another variable: running speed. The slower you're moving, the faster that timer runs out, regardless of how long you press the button. And you can see this in most modern games, but it's most noticeable in Donkey Kong Country Returns, Super Meat Boy, and Rayman Legends. Super Mario Bros. Also increased responsiveness by allowing the player to control Mario in the air, and you can see the same thing here in Super Mario Bros. 3. The difference, of course, is that in Super Mario Bros. 3, there's a visual component to it. This didn't affect gameplay at all, but it gave the player a far greater sense of control. Visual responsiveness can be just as important as control responsiveness, sometimes even more so. This is Mega Man 2, released in 1988. Compare it to Super Mario Bros. 3, and you can see that the mid-air control is a lot more responsive. This isn't necessarily good or bad. It does, however, lend itself to the twitchy run-and-gun gameplay the Mega Man series is now known for. The difference between Mega Man and Mario is important to point out because it illustrates how this mechanic can affect the game's overall tone and gameplay. The way the game responds to the player's actions helps define what kind of game the player is playing. Here's Metroid, released in 1986, and Super Metroid, 1994. Notice Samus's floaty controls and the way the character slows to respond in midair. Almost like gravity's off, like we're walking on the moon. It's otherworldly, alien, and along with the soundtrack and smart visuals, it helped establish a tour de force atmosphere in a time where games rarely tried anything so brave. Making jumping feel good in a video game requires more than just responsive mechanics. It also demands a commitment to being fair to the player. We never want the game to feel cheap. Never. This is Pitfall, 1982, 3 years before Super Mario. Notice how Pitfall Harry has more than enough room to clear that jump? That's because the challenge really isn't the jump. It's timing it with the rolling logs. That's to say that the jumps aren't the challenge, it's the obstacles. And you can see this throughout the last 30 years of platformers, from the salty sprint level in Runner 2 to City Escape in Sonic Generations. Scott Rogers called this space the jump zone. It's the space between the earliest point where you can jump and still clear the gap and the edge. The idea is that we give players enough room in case they jump too early or need to evade obstacles mid-air. Good jump zones will be different for every game. Not only do they need to take into account the maximum length of the jump, but they also need to take into account how that jump responds to player input. Challenge is difficult to balance in video games. Make it too hard, it's cheap. Make it too easy, it's boring. The key here is to make even the most challenging jumps easier in the subtlest of ways. The player still needs to feel like he succeeded because of his skill, but there are certain elements that we can make more lenient without the player ever noticing. Most 2D jumping games draw their hitboxes to always favor the player. Take 2009's Canabalt, for example. The runner is actually a 24 by 24 pixel character, but the hitbox, the real size as far as the engine is concerned, is actually significantly smaller at just 12 by 14, and the hitbox isn't centered. It's snapped to the bottom left corner. This is all so Canabalt's lightning-fast gameplay doesn't overwhelm the player. You can wait to the last second to jump over a box without stumbling, and you can pretty much jump over any gap at the very last second. The boxes have hitboxes too, but they're only 2 pixels tall. That way, if the player is jumping, like at all, they'll clear the obstacle. And this happens in almost every game that features jumping. Take a look at these thorns in Dust and Elyisan Tale, and these enemy hitboxes in Mega Man X. My favorite are these spikes in Sonic the Hedgehog that actually push Sonic off of them. If a game still feels cheap, or if it's just more challenging than you'd like, there's one more big handout we can slide to the player: the ghost jump. Give the player a small gap after leaving the ledge where he can still jump in midair. This is most common in puzzle games that use platforming elements, games like Braid and Fez, or Metroidvania games like Symphony of the Night and Guacamelee. But you can still see it in some true platformers, like the recent Rayman Legends. In most early platformers, jumping takes as many frames on the rise as it does on the descent. But something strange happens over time. In Super Mario Bros. 3, the shortest jump you can make is 15 frames on the rise, 3 spent at the apex, and then 15 on the descent. 15, 3, 15. But Mario's longest jump is 33 frames up. Not a single frame spent at the apex, and then 25 down. 33, 25. They're not proportional. In almost every jumping game I tested, the lower you jump, the slower you fall. The most obvious reason for this is so that players will have enough time to direct a character's fall. But there's also another reason. The longer a character takes to fall, the more can happen in that space of time. There are more opportunities for interesting gameplay that otherwise wouldn't exist. Take a look at Super Meat Boy. It has one of the longest descents. It takes Meat Boy 33 frames to descend from his highest apex, and a good portion of the challenge in Super Meat Boy is aiming his fall just right. But there's a second reason I'd look to Super Meat Boy for inspiration. Everything I've talked about here are really just dials, independent variables that can be turned up or turned down, tweaked one way or another depending on the game you want to produce. When I set out to make this video, I hoped to find some common equation between the games. There really isn't any. Super Meat Boy was created on feel and gut, or as Tommy Refenes himself put it, truth is there are no formulas. It's just a big, huge hack.